I've read some things you've said, and apparently that not only do you feel that NAFTA was a disaster for the United States, but you feel that this fast track on the TPP are worse. Could you go into that reasoning?
Well, NAFTA caused the U.S. to lose approximately 800,000 jobs. And TPP, NAFTA only involved 3 countries. TPP involves quite a few more countries. And the total trade percent that TPP represents about 40% of the U.S. economy. And so the effect of TPP would be much greater on the overall economy than NAFTA was. It would, as we've seen from NAFTA, NAFTA was claimed to be a net positive for the U.S., but it's been just the opposite. So TPP will actually do much more damage than NAFTA. You know, actually, that's probably not a very good answer. I know I'm all over the place on that. So I got to think that through.
If this is bad for the economy, why is the administration pushing it?
Well, they're pushing it because corporations are pushing it, because really what you have to understand about NAFTA and about TPP is neither one of these agreements are really about trade, and that they're really not about the U.S. exchanging goods and services bilaterally. What they're about is setting up outsourcing platforms so we can move industry, factories, and jobs offshore and bring the goods back in tax and tariff free. That's the intent of these agreements. They're not trade agreements, they're outsourcing agreements. And so TPP is the same model, but it's just a much broader model than what NAFTA is because of the number of countries involved, primarily in Southeast Asia.
And somebody has to stand to benefit from this. Who is it, you know, besides the administration that's pushing this?
Well, the same people that benefited from NAFTA and all the other so-called free trade agreements, and that's the Wall Street crowd, and also the so-called multinational corporations, as well as foreign corporations that benefit from producing products offshore and selling them into the U.S.
Mm-hmm. And I wondered if you had any, you know, specific examples of that.
Specific examples of what?
Well, you just described, like a company, you know, manufacturing offshore and selling something here.
Well, one that comes to mind immediately is Apple Computer. Apple Computer employs a very small percentage of their overall workforce in the U.S. I think the number, if I recall correctly, is roughly 50,000 in the U.S. And they employ about 300,000, actually, I'm not sure exactly how many employees be Apple employees, but their main subcontractor is a company called Foxconn in the Shenzhen area of China, where their factories are mostly located, and they employ 800,000 people. Now I think about, you know, an estimate that I've seen is about 250 to 300,000 of those people are associated with Apple's production.
What is allowing the administration to keep this a secret? What brought it about so that this could happen?
Well, it's the way that they've structured the negotiation. And again, honestly, I'm not sure what the mechanism is for how they can keep it away from Congress, but the administration, I guess they're claiming executive privilege. That'd be my guess. But somehow, yeah, they've been able to shield it from Congress. So Congress hasn't been able to get a full view of TPP. They're only able to get a partial view based on specific requests that they make. They and their staff members can go view specific sections of the agreement, but they're not able to get the full agreement.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. You have a strong background in manufacturing, and that gives you sort of advantage to look at this maybe in a way that not everybody could look at it. And I wonder what your background in manufacturing, you know, what you bring to this subject that you feel is a little unique.
Well, what I bring is I was involved in what we now call outsourcing, and the one of the industry terms that's a clever way of disguising what it really is, supply chain management. I was involved in that from the very beginning, early on in my career, and honestly without realizing what the implications were longer term. None of us did that were involved in this in the early days. But I've been all throughout Asia, and I've seen from a ground level up how this works and what the impact is both there and here. And so the folks in DC that are dealing with these agreements, I'd say most of them, probably all of them, but most of them have never been in the industry. They don't really understand the mechanics of how this really works on the ground. They're dealing more from a theoretical point of view. And so the folks that are negotiating these agreements and the folks that are pushing them, theoretically they'll argue that this should be a benefit for the U.S. economy. But practically that's not true, and that's the benefit that I bring is I've seen it, I've lived it, I know what the real impact is, and I know what's actually happening based on how business is actually being conducted both in Asia primarily and in the U.S.
What can the public do? You know, your average viewer, a call to action. What would you advise them to do to try to put a stop to this?
Well, the most obvious thing they can do is they can contact their congressional representatives. And, you know, a lot of people feel like, well, what can I do just as one person? Well, as one person, unless you have a lot of wealth, there's probably not a whole lot that each one person can do. However, millions of people joining together can do a lot. And actually, this is why TPP, or actually what's called Trade Promotional Authority or Fast Track, this is why this has been stopped dead in its tracks right now, because millions of people joined together through various organizations, including unions, and they let their voices be heard. And they made a loud noise in DC, and they made Congress aware that if they did this, especially with the elections coming up in the fall, that they would pay a heavy price. And they listened because they're very nervous. Both the Democrats and Republicans are very nervous about what the fall elections look like. And so individually, people need to first contact their congressional representatives, and then I would encourage them to get involved in one of the numerous, there was actually 60 different organizations that joined together to oppose the TPP Fast Track Authority. And so I would encourage them, if they're not already part of an organization that's opposing, to join one. And again, individually, if when we join our voices together, we can have a big impact.
I think that's pretty good. Why don't we go